Hi, welcome to 20 Christmas Ideas with GourmetQuilter. We're having a whole lot of fun with the ideas. We're actually doing amazingly well. We're up to idea number 18. So we're well into our 20. We have only got a couple more to go. So there's more information on the website. There's a pattern. There's all sorts of things, information there if you're wanting to find out more on GourmetQuilter.com. Otherwise, I will get going and show you this idea number 18. We are doing some little nested cone trees. I just thought they would be really fun little decor things to have around at Christmas time. So we've got this nice tree here looking quite spectacular with its ornaments hanging on it. And inside we have another nice little cone tree. And inside that, guess what? There's yet another one. So I've got the three little nesting trees. I thought that was good because when we're not using them, they'll pack away quite tidy. Otherwise, they're quite decorative. They're fun. And I will just now start showing you how we're going to make one. So I'm just going to make the one. The pattern has all the sizes in it if you want to make all three. So I'm going to make a large one. So inside, it's all got fabric, so we need two pieces of fabric and we need a piece of some stiff stuff. So I've used a product called Fast to Fuse. It's actually fusible on both sides. There's other products, I'm not really familiar with all of them. I know there's other products around. Some are fusible, some are not. There's a product that I know called Timtex, and others, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of all of them. It's a stiffening, quite stiff, but you can stitch into it. And as I said, this one is fusible. You don't have to have a fusible one. You could easily just do without the fusible. So what we need is to cut our shape. So I've actually drawn my shape on. So you could either cut with scissors. Obviously, it's very easy to cut, and stiff though it is, it's not at all hard. This stuff is great to work with because it kind of bends out of, you'll see when I turn the tree out, because we have to make it inside out like other things, and it kind of has to be manipulated a little bit. I've had things made out of this that I've had in my suitcase that have been squashed all around the world, and they're looking quite bedraggled when I open the case, and then within a few hours they've completely sprung back into shape again. They're just wonderful. So either scissors for cutting this, or you can just use the ruler, the cutter without the ruler, and just slowly follow that line if you've got a line drawn on there. So always cut away from you, particularly when you're doing this sort of cutting, and just take your time. Don't try and rush anything, but it's actually quite good to cut a wide curve like this just with your cutter. You get a nice smooth line, or if you're not happy to do that, of course, there's always scissors. So we don't need that piece. So I've done a little bit of applique and things on there as well. So I've got my 2 squares of fabric. We're going to have a bright green tree this time. So on this side, this is the right side of my fabric. So what I want at the moment is just a line for the bottom of the tree, because I want to pop this little strip on. So I really need something that helps me gauge just where that is. So I'm just going to use my shape here. Now I'm coming in from the edges because we need to allow for a seam allowance, and I've got a pencil here, and I just want to draw a line. It doesn't have to be a hefty line, it'll be disappearing in the seam at the bottom, but just something so that I've got a line to line up for putting my little strip on. And so now what I want to do, the other thing I like to do when I'm doing this sort of thing, because it's very hard to turn out this very top piece, I like to just cut off the very top of the stiffening of the triangle, and that allows, that bit hasn't actually got any stiffening right in the very top, and I've done that on all 3 sizes so that the points will turn out for us. And now because my product is fusible, I'm going to fuse it onto here. So I want to try and line up that line that I've drawn so that I can see where that edge is when I've got it all on there. And I think we're going to do pretty well. It doesn't have to be absolutely amazingly exact, it's just so that it's got a guide there. So I'm just going to iron that in place now. Should have a seam allowance on these 2 straight sides, and there should be a whole area that we're going to be trimming off later around this part here. So because I've now got that line to follow, I want to put my little strip on. So I've got my little strip here. This is just a straight strip. I've got fusible web on the back, and I'm just going to ease that around, and that's where that little line that I've drawn will really help me position that. So you could just make a little mark if you wanted to of where you wanted it to go. I'm just going to follow that line. I'm probably about ½ an inch away from that line, and even though it's a straight piece of fabric, actually I might just position it before I iron it. I'm using a steam seam, which is a little bit sticky, so I can get it to sit there just to make sure it's looking right before I iron it. So I'm just pulling off that paper, but it will curve around quite nicely because it's a fairly gentle curve that we're working with. This doesn't work with tight shapes with a straight piece, but it works quite nicely like this. And we'll get this on so that we can do. So that's all looking pretty good. I think it's a pretty even distance. It's sitting quite nicely, so now I can iron that in place. But we're not going to stitch it just yet. We'll stitch it later because it'll help hold it through with the backing when we get to that stage. So the other thing I want to do, this time I'm going to put my 3 stars on this large tree rather than having them all identical. So I'm going to put one of the stars in the center front somewhere. I can line up my diagonals a little bit and maybe just come up about there. Nobody sees all stars or measures them, I've discovered, so I feel that I can put them pretty much anywhere I like. So I know that I've got that sort of a distance there, so I only want half that distance out to the very edge from a star point here, because that's going to join up, and just to give them a rough sort of even spacing. They won't be exact, but they will be close. It's amazing how the eye can trick you. If you can make it think something's right, it probably is. So I think they're all looking pretty good. Iron those in place, and now I'm going to applique those. Now I'm going to free motion stitch those in place, just because I think it's easier than trying to turn, because this is quite stiff. You can turn it if you just want to do straight work or other applique stitching. You might have decorative fabrics that you don't want to do any applique on, and that's absolutely fine as well, but I'm using these delicious colours and I'm going to applique. So I'm just going to do a free motion on the applique, just close to the edge. It doesn't take very long. So I can go ahead and finish doing all the applique because it's really this simple, and then show you how we put it all together. So I've gone ahead, I've done the applique of my stars. It's really fun to stitch on this stuff because it's stiff, it doesn't scrunch or do anything it shouldn't do, so it's really nice to work with. So now what I need to do is put it right sides together with the lining, so I can do that. We could have trimmed all this off earlier, but we didn't really need to. It's not in the way. We will be trimming it and we can just do it in one go then. So I've got those 2 squares right sides together now. And so now what we want to do is we want to stitch right next to this white stiff stuff. So you could use a zipper foot for this if you wanted to. I'm going to just use my regular 1/4 inch foot because I find that it actually manages absolutely fine, and then I don't have to keep changing feet. So right next to, as I said, so we're going through both of these 2 fabrics, but not stitching the white stuff, but right next to it. And all the way around that curve. So just make sure everything else is staying together. You could have put I could have put a couple of clips in to hold the edges, but it's actually not really a problem. because it copes amazingly well stitching up on this with the foot half up and half off. Doesn't seem to bother it. So now we've got this curved seam stitched, which is really good. So now we want to trim off this corner, and again I would do it with this. If you would rather use your scissors, by all means do that. I'm just going to trim it down to somewhere around about 1/4 inch away from the stitching. And now we just want to turn that out the right way along that seam. And it just pops out. It's really nifty. And we're just going to give it a quick press along there. So you want to pull the back to the back as much as possible. You don't really want to see it on the front there. So that we have a nice edge. And I'm going to turn it over and iron it from the back as well in a minute. Just in the meantime, just want to pull that as far as we can that way. It's looking pretty good. So, and now just pull it over to the back as much as you can. And that should also fuse to the back, although it doesn't really matter whether it's fused or not, but it probably will because it's double-sided fusible stiffening. So I think that's looking pretty good. So now what we're going to do is now we're going to stitch, and I am just going to use a regular straight stitch for this. We're going to stitch either side of our little strip that we fused on all the way through, so that will hold all that edge nice and firm for us. So I'll go ahead and get these 2 lines of stitching done. So I'm just on the little stripy strip, and I'm just doing a regular straight stitch just near the edge, and I'll go along the other edge as well. So I've finished doing my 2 rows of stitching. Not sure if you can see them. Colours pretty much disappeared into the fabric there, but that just holds that edge, which will be our lower edge of the tree, really nicely. So now what I'm suggesting that we do when we make these, we need to have a seam exposed somewhere. So in that case I like to have my edges neatened. So what I'm going to do is just do a little overcast with a zigzag stitch. So I've just set my machine to zigzag. I've got an open toe foot on that allows the needle to swing. You don't want to be using a narrow foot when you're doing zigzags. And I'm just going to zigzag all the way along these 2 straight edges. So I just start in a little bit and come down, and then there's nothing hard about this. But what it does is it just sort of contains the edges so that they stay nice when they're a little bit exposed. They are inside the tree, so they don't really get seen, but it's nicer than having an edge that's going to fray for us. So I can go around these 2 sides and show you the next bit. So I've done all this zigzag along these 2 straight edges here, and it just gives it a nice little edge so that it won't, nothing else will happen to it now. So now what we need to do is fold this over and stitch this seam. So we want to stitch again next to the stiffening there. You can probably see it, but you probably can't see the underside when that's sitting on top, but they should be fairly similar in the amount of seam allowance. And we've got a slightly more than 1/4 inch there, which is intentional because you want it to be just that little bit more to work with when you're doing something like this. So all we're going to do now is stitch straight up to the point, so we'll do that hopefully right next to the stiff stuff in the seam allowance. Better. So this is just going a straight stitch all the way up to the top, So remember, we don't have anything in that very pointed of it, which is really good because that will help us. So if your point's got a little bit off there, which looks like mine's just moved a little bit there, but I don't think it's anything too dramatic. And then we need to just snip off that corner. So from where we stitched, we want to snip, and I actually like to snip it down a bit. So rather than just straight across, just to reduce the amount of bulk that we're going to try and fit into that point. And now comes the fun part, because we have to turn this out the right way, and this stiff stuff is a little stiff. So I found the best way to do it is simply to just turn it. Don't panic about all this. It's a little bit firm to do this with, but it will come out for us, and it will all smooth out very nicely again as well. So what you don't want to do is create some like a big clump, which can happen sometimes. You want to try and push it through bit by bit. I have found my trusty chopstick is very helpful for this sort of thing, and to just try and get it to come through bit by bit is the best way, because you can't just sort of push it out super easy, but it will come. There it comes. And then when you get to that top bit, you just want to push that out so that you get a reasonably nice point up the top there, which we should do. So there's no stiffening in that very top little bit, but it will sit up really nicely there now. And so that's all looking pretty good. And what I have found that I then do, and you just have to be very careful doing this, I like to just run the iron over it, because the heat will help that all settle. So even if you've got like a sort of a steamy sort of iron, so not really ironing it, I'm just running the iron over it so that the heat can go into the product, just to allow it to settle into shape and be happy it likes it. So you can see that that's all come out beautifully now, and it just likes that little bit of heat to allow it to readjust itself. So there we have another large tree, and we could hide a tree. Oh, we could hide two trees. Look at that. Who knew that there was trees underneath? So that was a fun little cone tree. They're little nesting trees, so great for packing away. I just thought they were a really fun decoration to have around during the Christmas season. They could be Christmassy fabrics, they could be anything you like, really. And that was idea number 18. I will see you again with Christmas idea number 19.